Buenos nachos, amigos, and welcome to Record Breakers, a music podcast where a group of friends gather together, hang out, share music with each other, like a little book club for music, take turns an album at a time. It's fun. I'm PD Rave, and I kind of preferred Stephanie. I preferred can't believe I forgot her name.
Jodie Sweetin?
Jodie Sweetin. I prefer Jodie Sweetin. She's mainly because she was around my age when the show was on. She's around my age, so I was like, or at least the character was. Here with me is my team, my squad, my crew. We've got David.
Team Jodie Sweetin, Team Stephanie, all the way. PD. That's the good brother, PD Rave. Team Jodie Sweetin, all the way.
We've got Drew.
Oh, you guys didn't give me enough time to try to find the... was it Laura? Laura Winslow? Is that the girl I'm thinking of?
Yeah,
is that the right one?
Laura Winslow, yeah.
Well, if we're going Family Matters, I will go with the late Michelle Thomas, who played Myra Boutros Monkhouse.
Yeah.
If we're going in that direction.
Poor girl. Let us never forget that show had a whole plot line in which Urkel cloned himself and then put his clone into the coolness machine, just so that we could have Stefan Urkel permanently on the show.
I try not to think about that show.
Executive meddling in full effect.
I have a lot of trauma related to that show. I try not to think about it.
Yes. Of course, we are still here with our guest for this round of episodes, the one, the only Mike Averand. How you doing, Averand?
Was I the only one into Blossom?
Blossom was cool. I think this was like
I will say Blossom now.
Yeah, I was on the ground floor. I was like, I'm 11. This seems great.
Yes. Blossom, I think I watched Blossom. I just never it didn't stick with me, but I remember Blossom, of course, and we can all agree that nobody cares about Step by Step. Hell, nobody remembers it. Remember that?
It was just the buffer. It was just the buffer until Hanging with Mr. Cooper.
Yeah.
Shout out to Kaz.
It's the show that lasted forever, but nobody remembers. Step by Step.
Why'd they make the one cousin live out in the garage or like in the yard?
Because they suspected him of certain crimes.
Why does Drew not know he's muted?
I am muted.
Yes. All right, we're talking about let's enough of the divergence for now. Let's talk about music. Let's talk about an album. The provider of the album this week is Drew. Drew, what do you have for us this week?
I thought we were just going to talk about 90s sitcoms all day. No, I brought...
And now my podcast block is officially gone.
Pathetic Use of Potential, a band out of the great Canada, little punk rock band, got shoved my way through a friend of the show, former host of the show, Patrick, aka the Swagger, PUP, in other words, with their album Morbid Stuff.
Yeah, Morbid Stuff. Let's talk about expectations. David, what were your expectations coming into this album?
Given that I saw in the Record Breaker Slack that this had been liked by one Patrick the Swagger, the gentleman that I am still filling in only temporarily for, after Drew's recommendation, I figured that I was expecting something in the vein of punk rock, and I was getting myself mentally prepared for that with something that isn't usually in my musical wheelhouse. I try to put myself in that headspace, theater of the mind, if you will, of someone that would appreciate that. So I was ready for it.
Mm-hmm. Mike, what were your expectations coming into this album?
I knew about this album like a couple weeks before it came out, so I had already listened to it like 6 to 20 times. But yeah, I just kind of expected a lot of guitar work. a lot of nihilism.
Yeah.
Pretty much that. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And what more can you want? Guitar work and nihilism.
That made me just realize two of the more recent punk bands that I found, this band and a more like bluegrassy punk band, Days in Days, are all both very nihilistic and hating everything. So that's great.
That kind of sounds like a zombie game.
Yes.
Nihilistic and hating everything.
No,
Yes.
Days and Days.
Oh.
Ah. They kind of look like zombies. I think one of them used to do a lot of heroin.
Yes.
That'll do it.
Ooh. With the heroin and such. Yeah, let's talk about this album musically. Drew, how would you describe this album musically? What would be the themes elements that come up?
The thing about this album that I found that was weird is very rarely do I listen to an album, especially like modern albums, and it's like, oh, it's very squarely this genre. Like it very much fits into this one. It's not this trying to mix this in with this. It's not a Lil Nas X situation of country plus rap equals something, or it's not like trying to mix in, oh, this is 80s plus like new indie. Like this is a punk rock record. That is the hole that it is filling. It has maybe some elements of different punk rock, but it's not trying to be punk rock plus something else. It's punk rock. It's got that bratty, nihilistic, lyrical quality to it. So there is that. You have you have a lot of guitar work. There's a lot of crunchy guitar work. When I first listened to this record and it first got like put my way through, like I said, Patrick, and then also talking about it was your friend and mine, Miss KJ Adesi on the Twitters, the one that sometimes wears clothes. It's something that it reminded me of the first time I heard a band called The Refused. And reminded me of like, oh yeah, there's always going to be there's always going to be people from the ages of 15 to 35 that are mad at the world and have something to say and are going to make punk rock. That's just always going to happen. It's got a bit of that growl and a bit of that stiff upper lip, but this album in particular, it's their third full-length album, and from everything I've read about it, they are only growing in leaps and bounds as far as the thought behind their compositions and their use of melody. It reminds me of if Good Clean Fun leaned the opposite way away from the more hardcore sound and leaned more into like the punk rock sound. The energy and that thought of composition is really what like hit me here. Is like everything had a hook, everything had a like fun beat to it, and everything like sort of sticks with you through the song. Like it's still punk rock, but it's got a little bit of like head bobbiness to it, which I think is cool, while still being like that sneering anger dripping through all of it, like just the mad at the world sort of, like Mike said, like that nihilism that's like everything kind of sucks, like whatever. Like nonchalantness to it, which I think is cool.
Yeah. David, how would you describe this album musically?
Punk rock. To expound, as I said at the beginning, I put myself in the headspace of someone that this music would really connect with, who this would be for, to listen to this album, because it's just normally not the type of rock music I digest so easily. I would say that it had a lot of those things that I normally expect. It had a lot of really good sing-along choruses. that most people less jaded and cynical than I would ignore or just not notice the obvious crowd echo reverb effects in the choruses that tell you this is the part of the song where you sing along. And I can accept that. I can accept that because that is who this is for, and that's cool. Lyrically, there is a great point where Mr. Babcock makes the point that a lot of it is very, very literal. And I appreciate that there is a self-awareness sprinkled all throughout this album, which we'll talk about in a little later when I bring up my favorite track on this album. But it's punk rock.
Yeah. Some punk rock. Mike, how would you describe this album musically?
One of the most musically sarcastic albums I've ever heard in my life. Because I was thinking about it, like a lot of the stuff Drew was saying, where it has the upbeat thing. A lot of the upbeat stuff almost serves to be the opposite of what he's saying out loud, and it kind of serves as this counterpoint to make it seem more fucked up than it actually is. Like it seems like he's trying to just create this discord in what he's saying there like versus what the sound says. Almost. Yeah, like the entire thing doesn't want to take itself too seriously while it's taking itself way too seriously. The entire thing is like seems pretty rooted in this just deep pessimism and self-destruction. But they did one thing that was extremely goofy. Is before the album came out, they put out the chords and the lyrics to a ton of people, just as many people as wanted to record it, and they just like challenged everyone to play the song "Free at Last," how they were going to play it, and send them videos. And they got 253 videos, so you can hear like the "Free at Last" song. You can hear almost any different type of version of it you want to hear, made by people who are anywhere from like professional opera singers to random assholes. But it's I don't know. I don't think the thing is like nobody really comes close to nailing it either.
Yeah. Yeah, musically this is very much like David said, this is punk rock. Like it's pretty on the nose, but in a great way. And it does it really well. It nails that punk rock sound really well, and it has really great energy to it. Especially kind of as you drill down to some of the songs, how well they include that in some of the different songs. Drew, what would be some of the key tracks to zero in on?
Well, the first track I heard by them, is the title track and the lead off, which hearing Morbid Stuff outside of the context of it was what made me interested in hearing the full album, because I was like, okay, if they're gonna do this with that, a weird like juxtaposition that I said I've liked before. I'm a real big Fish fan. If we want to talk about juxtaposed music lyric situations, it's something I absolutely love, and Morbid Stuff does that, and it got me hooked instantly. Another one I think that does it really, really well, and I'm a sucker for, Scorpion Hill. It's just dour and like in the lyrics, but it's got a bop to it. It's freaking weird for it, but I love it. And then Full Blown Meltdown, I want to mention just simply because of the bass line being like such a slap happy thudding mess throughout the entire thing, and that being something in like punk rock bass playing that like I never did. I never had the like chance to really mess around with that. Ska music, what do you know? But it was something that if we would have had a bit more punk rock to it, like I would have wanted to make a bass line like that. Like something about it is just like a little bit primal, but like still controlled enough. I think it's really cool.
Mm-hmm. David, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
I will start by just saying the first 3 tracks on the album are a good 1, 2, 3 combo, just all together. Bloody Mary, Kate, and Ashley was the first song on the album that wasn't Mr. Babcock, Stephen Babcock, putting his raw and ugly emotions out there to hear. And for that reason alone, it was jarring. I'm certainly not one to call anyone out for telling stories rife with self-loathing and mental self-destruction. So I respect that all throughout the album, and having this little reprieve was appreciated. I will say the song Full Blown Meltdown, in my opinion, is kind of brilliant. It's almost a metal song, and I really dug the riff work on this one. It also lyrically reminded me of a favorite song of mine by the band Porcupine Tree called The Sound of Music, where the general message is, yeah, these musicians might be a little messed up, and they're writing these fucked up lyrics that you kind of relate to, but they're making money off of you, and they know it. For everything else on this album, I can definitely connect with the idea of being sick of grown men whining about their problems. I can definitely relate to that on both sides of the coin. But the song in general had some really good riffing. This was, as it mentioned on the song Kids, the lyrics got a little bit too literal up until we got to Full Blown Meltdown, until I realized, oh, he's completely self-aware and he hates himself. Yeah, I get what's going on here. I respect the hell out of this. I get it. Yeah, I really do. But definitely Full Blown Meltdown. I felt like that was really the centerpiece of the album.
Mike, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
I got every time I get one of their albums, I end up getting stuck in the first half of it, and then after time, I end up pushing my way through the rest of the album. Mine are gonna be Kids, Free at Last, and See You at Your Funeral. And the one thing I really loved about See You at Your Funeral is just how, like, I used to be a lead singer in a punk band for about 3 years, and one of my goals was to write the most kind of dark and messy things I could come up with, and he kind of kicks my ass on all three of those by just a crazy margin. But those ones definitely, like, especially Kids seems to mess with me the most. I don't know. It's not a feel good album I think I would go to anytime I wanted to cheer myself up, but anytime anytime it's bad, like, this is going on.
Yes. Yeah, that is a fun way to use angry music, angry nihilistic music. But yeah, I would say I will echo the sentiment for myself for Bloody Mary, Kate, and Ashley. It was a nice divergence on the album, and kind of a nice detour sonically, and it was cool. It was a cool song, like cool sonically. And the other one, I thought City was a cool close to the album. The kind of the way it's built is a nice like antithesis to like the how the rest of the album like the mood is, but in it being like a softer, more like indie rock sound, but then kind of just having this noise late into the song, like this cacophony of noise that kind of builds up later in the song, which is really cool. And I thought it ended the album really well. But yeah, let's bring things back around the horn, talk about some conclusive thoughts. David, at the end of the day, what is your conclusion on this album?
My conclusion on this album is that I would give it an almost, but not quite. That is what I would say. By the final track, City, I realized that I was kind of fast forwarding through tracks on the album. I felt like I got the gist of it by about track 7 or 8, and Full Blown Meltdown was the one that really kind of stood out with it. I usually like to, if I'm listening to an album for this podcast or anything else, I really like to sit down and allow myself to go on a journey and let the album kind of take me wherever it's going to take me. I like albums that have dynamics and go in directions, and this really didn't. It was one straight path at its respected pace of about 70 miles an hour, and it just kind of stayed there, and it didn't really deviate much. The songs kind of came and went, and then when I realized it, the album was over, and I didn't really feel any inclination or want to go back and listen to it again. I did it just for the sake of reviewing it, but I felt nothing that made me want to go back to it. Especially the first half of the album. The first half was very. I don't want to go as far as to say one note, but it felt like all of the tracks were really just kind of running together in just one direction. And yes, I know it's a punk rock album, but I said at the beginning of the podcast, I don't usually connect with punk rock very much. So, with the exception of Full Blown Meltdown, the album had some hooks here and there. It had some riffs here and there, but overall, there was nothing that really brought me back.
Mike, what would be your conclusion on this album as a whole?
I think he's dead. I think he's pretty dead on. There's one note going through the whole thing. It just happens to be that one note that I'm generally looking for. Like the first part of the album is kind of an album that I wish I'd written at some point, or wish I'd gotten around to or gotten near. And it just, I don't know, it's almost farther in my wheelhouse than it should be. And that probably means I should be listening to some other stuff.
Yeah, it's a pretty spot on punk rock record, and doesn't try to be much more than that. It has some cool moments, and it has some cool like ideas, but it's pretty much just a punk rock record. I think overall it just does it really well. And it's gonna be, I would say, it's a good source of having a couple of songs that could like permeate your different playlists as a nice like, this is the PUP part of my, like my daily listen, or like if it just pops up into your like random, like your Spotify, one of those dealies where they populate a playlist for you, it'd be a fun divergence. But yeah, as an album, it's kind of just this one thing with some kind of like some sidetracks. But I think overall it is a fun one of those. It is a good one of those, as it's been said before. But yeah, Drew, what would be your conclusion on this album as a whole?
Drew?
I think he's frozen.
Oh, there you go.
I'm an idiot. I think I'm muted. Oh, is my webcam frozen too?
Yeah.
Let's try one of these guys.
Theater of the mind, everybody.
Hey, there we go. Everything froze up on me. But there are times where I get into the weeds musically, where I'm going off on different like jazzy things, or getting into retro wave holes or vaporwave weirdness, or just going down those weird rabbit holes of music. And then something pulls me out and reminds me, oh yeah, there's punk rock out there, and that's pretty damn cool. It's one of those things where I mentioned the Refused earlier, and they had an album that felt like a coming of the guard sort of moment of an album called The Shape of Punk to Come. And I feel like this could have been another one of those like, hey, by the way, there's still like punk rock out here to be like angry at the world, because there's stuff to be angry at the world about still. I don't know if you've heard, like, stuff can still suck, and sometimes people need to yell about it to get it out. And yeah, like David said, it is sometimes like, we're selling this, and the art I'm creating, I understand, also speaks to people who like me, kind of hate everything, and now I'm profiting off it. So am I becoming what I hate? And blah, 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 blah. And that self-awareness there, I think, keeps you honest. So I'm excited to see where more of this band goes. And if they keep growing like it seems they have been, that's going to be really exciting. It's an album that, in case you wonder how punk rock this album is, it's 11 tracks. It's under 40 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
There is a manic energy to all of it, but it doesn't go too crazy. It doesn't get like out in the weeds of insanity where it isn't listenable. I think this is the easiest listening, like straight up punk record I've heard in a while.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And not easy listening, like it's gonna have a nice light flute solo in the background.
There won't be a cameo from Michael McDonald, is what you're saying.
No.
Yeah, Yamo be
If there was a
evil.
cameo
been
from Michael
excellent.
McDonald on the album, that would be great.
I'm gonna do a punk rock cover of Yamo Be There. Yamo burn this building to the ground.
I want that.
Yes. Those are our thoughts on PUP's Morbid Stuff. Now we get to the main event of the evening. We get to our haiku reviews, where we sum it all up in poetic form.
Edie, can I go first? Because I really got to use the bathroom.
All right. Well, let's get down to the nitty gritty. Haiku numero uno. David, what is your haiku?
Self-aware, sad punk. It's almost relatable, but the riffs are dull.
Mm-hmm. Mike, what is your haiku?
Vitriol in song, not your feel-good summer vibe. Nihilist as hell.
Mm-hmm. My haiku, straightforward punk fun with some nice divergences. Credit Canada. And of course, last but not least, Drew, what is your haiku?
Just realized my camera froze. Weird. YouTube listeners, have fun with that one. Some good old punk rock. To prove it ain't dead yet. Love every note.
Mm-hmm. Those are our thoughts on PUP's Morbid Stuff. You can, of course, check it out on our Spotify playlist. Play Record Breakers, a home game. Do your due diligence and your dude diligence. Kind of play along at home. Follow along with us on this journey. On the Spotify playlist will be next week's record. And finally, as it is its turn in the cycle, it will be Mike. Mike, what do you have for us next week?
I have Flying Lotus's 2008 album, Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a city.
Yeah.
It's a state of mind.
It is all, yeah.
Yes.
It also is a Spanish phrase.
Yes. The Angelus. But that'll be next week. And this is this week. And you can, of course, find us all over the internet. David is at Call Me DJM. Drew is at XDruciferX. I'm Mike is at Avarant, Avarant. I'm at PD Rave. The show's at 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers. RecordBreakersPodcast.com and RecordBreakersPodcast@gmail.com if you want to email us. Rebelli.net for listening to other shows. Rebelli TV on YouTube. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, anywhere you find podcasts. Subscribe, like, share, do all the things. Until next time, hasta los huevos.
Toodaloo.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.